He was a teenager, and he was dying. Leprosy was eating him alive, slowly stealing his hands, his sight, and his face. And yet this boy was about to ride out and shatter the army of the most feared conqueror of the age. His name was Baldwin IV, the Leper King of Jerusalem. And what he did to Saladin should have been impossible. Baldwin was born in 1161, the only son of King Amalric of Jerusalem. He was a bright and charming child, a gifted rider, and the heir to the richest Christian kingdom in the East. When he was 9, his father placed him in the care of a scholar named William of Tyre. William would become the great historian of the kingdom. And it was William who first saw that something was wrong. The boys were playing a game, digging their nails into each other's arms to see who could bear the pain the longest. The other children cried out. Baldwin felt nothing. His right arm was numb. It was the first sign of leprosy, a slow and incurable disease that would eat away at his body for the rest of his life. The physicians of 3 faiths could do nothing for him. His tutors kept the truth quiet, for to name the disease aloud could cost the boy his crown, and so the kingdom prepared to hand its throne to a child it knew was already marked for death. In 1174, King Amalric died of a fever. 3 days later, the boy was crowned in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Baldwin IV, King of Jerusalem, was 13 years old. For 2 years, the kingdom was ruled by regents in his name. Then, at 15, Baldwin took the full power of the crown into his own failing hands. He would rule himself, for as long as his body allowed. He had inherited a kingdom balanced on a knife's edge. The Crusader states were a thin strip of Christian land along a Muslim coast, held by only a few thousand knights, surrounded on every side, and a new power was rising to meet him. His name was Saladin, a brilliant Kurdish general who was uniting Egypt and Syria into a single empire, closing like a fist around the Christian kingdom. Many expected the leper boy to be a puppet. He was not. Baldwin learned to rule. He chose his commanders, set his own strategy, and rode with his armies in person, even as the disease tightened its grip. In the autumn of 1177, the kingdom's strength was scattered. Much of the army had marched north with the Count of Flanders, leaving the south almost undefended. Saladin saw his chance. He led a huge army out of Egypt and into the kingdom, burning and raiding as he came. His goal was Jerusalem itself. Baldwin rushed to the coastal city of Ascalon with the few hundred knights he could gather. When he saw the size of Saladin's army, he knew he could not stop it in open battle, and pulled his men inside the walls. It was a fatal mistake for Saladin. Believing the sickly boy king was trapped and harmless, he let his army spread out across the countryside to plunder. He left the dying king behind him and marched on. But Baldwin was not finished. He sent word to the Knights Templar to ride from Gaza and join him. Then he led his men out of Ascalon and onto the road behind Saladin. At the head of the army they carried their holiest relic, a fragment of the true cross set in gold. Baldwin had it raised before the soldiers. Then, it is said, he climbed down from his horse and knelt in the mud to pray. On the 25th of November, near a hill called Montgisard, they found them. Saladin's scattered army, strung out across the land, baggage and men spread for miles, completely unready for an attack. Baldwin gave the order to charge. A few hundred knights lowered their lances and crashed down the slope into an army many times their size. The surprise was total. Saladin's men had no time to form a line. The heavy Crusader cavalry tore through them with lance and sword, throwing the whole army into chaos. The boy king was in the middle of it, fighting with bandaged hands. Beside him rode his fiercest lord, Reynold of Chatillon, lately freed from 16 years in a Muslim prison and hungry for revenge. Saladin tried to rally his guard, but it was too late. His army broke and ran. What had begun as an invasion became a slaughter, a panicked flight across miles of open ground. Saladin himself barely escaped. By one account, he fled on a racing camel and reached Egypt with only a fraction of the men he had led out. Of his great army, perhaps 1 in 10 made it home. It was a stunning victory. A 16-year-old leper, with a few hundred knights, had broken the most powerful man in the Middle East. To the Christians of the East, It looked like a miracle, but the victory was not bloodless. The Crusaders lost many of their own, and Saladin would never forget the humiliation. He would spend the next 10 years preparing to undo this single afternoon. But there was one enemy Baldwin could never defeat. Year by year, the leprosy took more of him. It claimed his hands, then his arms, then his legs. Centuries later, films would give him a silver mask, but that is invention. The real Baldwin wore no mask. His ruined face was plain for all to see, and his kingdom, strangely, never cast him out or hid him away. He was not invincible. He lost battles too. At Montgisard he was beaten and nearly captured, carried from the field on the back of a knight, because he could no longer mount his own horse. And yet, again and again, the sick young king did what should have been impossible. Outnumbered once more at a place called Leper King, he drove Saladin back a second time. For as long as Baldwin breathed, Jerusalem held. By the age of 22, he was blind. He could no longer walk, and still he refused to surrender the kingdom. When Saladin besieged the great desert castle of Kerak, Baldwin had himself carried to war on a litter. It was enough. At the news that the Leper King himself was coming, Saladin lifted the siege and withdrew. Even broken and blind, Baldwin's name was still a weapon. But a dying king cannot hold a kingdom forever. Baldwin had no children. The crown would pass to his sister Sibylla, and to the man she had married, a vain and weak newcomer named Guy of Lusignan. Baldwin saw the danger in Guy and tried everything to keep him from the throne. He even had his young nephew crowned as co-king. But the disease was faster than his plans. In the spring of 1185, Baldwin IV died. He was 24 years old. He had been a king for 11 years, and at war for almost every one of them. Without him, everything he had held together came apart. His young nephew died within a year. Sibylla crowned her husband, and Guy of Lusignan became king of Jerusalem. 2 years after Baldwin's death, Guy led the army of Jerusalem into the desert to face Saladin. At a place called the Horns of Hattin, with no water and no escape, that army was surrounded and destroyed. The true cross, the relic that Baldwin had knelt before at Montgisard, was captured on the field. The army of the kingdom was gone. Within months, Jerusalem surrendered to Saladin. The holy city that Baldwin had defended with his dying body was lost. It would never be a Christian kingdom again. Historians have wondered ever since. While the Leper King lived, blind and broken and carried to battle on a litter, the kingdom held, and Saladin was beaten. 2 years after he died, it was all gone. Baldwin IV was dealt the cruelest hand a king could be given, and he spent every year he had defending a kingdom he knew he would not live to keep. If stories of courage like his are worth your time, subscribe and march with us into the next one.